All right, welcome back. This video focuses on chapters 12 through 16 of To Kill a Mockingbird. It does assume that you have read those chapters prior to watching the video. I'm going to jump right in today. No fancy slides because we have 5 chapters to cover and we want to make sure we're in good shape before we start reading the trial. So at the beginning of part 2 in chapter 12, there's a lot of conversation about Jem in regard to him growing and becoming older, and Scout is noticing, and we've seen this in previous chapters too, that they're growing apart. You know, one of the thematic topics in this novel is a loss of innocence or growing up. And we see that a lot from Jem. So here, Calpurnia is referring to him as Mr. Jem. I can't help it if Mr. Jem's growing up. He's going to want to be off to himself a lot now, doing whatever boys do. So you just come right on in the kitchen when you feel lonesome. We'll find lots of things to do in here. So there's lots of references to Jem growing older. And then summer begins and Dill isn't here. She gets a message from him, but she's definitely missing him. Atticus is called to the state legislature. But the focus of this chapter, one of the most significant moments, is the fact that Calpurnia takes Jem and Scout to her church when Atticus is away. We have this moment where there is a character, Lula, who does not feel comfortable with having these white kids at her church. But aside from this moment, everybody else is extremely welcoming of having Scout and Jem there. And it really is an insight to just what it's like in Calpurnia's world and what their church is like. They don't have hymn books, and it's because the majority of the congregation doesn't read. So instead, they do a practice called lining, where one person sings a line from a hymn and then everybody responds. So Jem and Scout get to see this world of Calpurnia's firsthand. Segregation is unfortunately alive and well in the Deep South in the mid-1930s. So this is an experience that they have never had before. And there's a couple of insights that come from that experience. One is the lining and the lack of education for them in regard to reading and writing. They learn about how Calpurnia came to be so educated. We also have this significant moment. We keep getting little snippets of what's going on with the Tom Robinson trial through Scout's eyes. Like, obviously everybody in the town knows what's going on, but Scout and Jem are only getting pieces of it from the adults. And in this case here, when Reverend Sykes asks for everybody to chip in, the collection plate goes around, they don't have enough money. They need $10. And specifically, they need $10 to help out Helen Robinson, Tom's wife. And so he closes the doors and he sweats it out and he makes sure he gets that money for everyone. But it allows Scout to start wondering about Tom Robinson and to ask questions. And so this conversation is extremely uncomfortable for me. Like, when I look at it, I get uncomfortable knowing that Scout's perception of the trial is that Tom Robinson has done something wrong. And so this conversation is interesting because you just have to remember that it's a young girl's perception with such limited knowledge of what's going on. So, Cal, I know Tom Robinson's in jail because he's done something awful, but why won't folks hire Helen? Calpurnia in her navy voile dress and a tub of a hat walked between Jem and me. It's because of what folks say Tom's done, she said. Folks aren't anxious to have anything to do with any of his family. Just what did he do, Cal? Calpurnia sighed. Old Mr. Bob Yule accused him of raping his girl and had him arrested and put in jail. Mr. Yule? My memory stirred. Does he have anything to do with those Yules that come every first day of school and then they go home? Well, Atticus said they were absolute trash. I never heard Atticus talk about folks the way he talked about the Yules. He said, yeah, those are the ones. Well, if everybody in Macomb knows what kind of folks the Yules are, they'd be glad to hire Helen. What's rape, Cal? It's something you'll have to ask Mr. Finch about, she said. He can explain it better than I can. And then she changes the subject. So again, our pieces of information are through the lens of this young girl. And, she doesn't want to tell her what rape is. But we do find out that we get the specifics of what Tom Robinson has been accused of. But we also find out that it's the Yules who have accused him of it. And when Atticus was talking about that with Uncle Jack earlier, we heard him say that. It's a case of, he said I did, I said I didn't, and no one is going to expect anybody to take a black man's word over a white man's. But the fact is, in this case, the white man in question is Yule. So it's it's part of the reason why Atticus has agreed to not only take the case, but to actually, defend Tom Robinson, because he knows that Tom Robinson didn't do what he's accused of doing. So, all right, let's go ahead and scroll down here. This is a really interesting passage. Again, a little uncomfortable, just because it's the perception of Jem and Scout thinking that the way that they talk is the right way, and the way that Calpurnia talks when she's with the rest of the Black congregation is the wrong way. And in 2020, we know that one is not right or wrong. It is a person's family and culture that dictates how you speak, right? So the way you are born into this world and the culture that you embrace and love is not right or wrong. But through the lens of these characters, there's a perception that speaking in correct standard grammar proves that you're smart and educated, and speaking in anything less than that indicates that you are not. So that's the perception of this moment. But Calpurnia has an interesting description here of what we now call code switching. She talks about, right here, that Calpurnia led a modest double life never dawned on me. The idea that she had a separate existence outside of our household was a novel one, to say nothing of her having command of 2 languages. Cal, I asked, why do you talk N-word talk to your folks when you know it's not right? Well, in the first place, I'm Black. That doesn't mean you have to talk that way when you know better, said Jem. Calpurnia tilted her hat and scratched her head, then pressed her hat down carefully over her ears. It's right hard to say, she said. Suppose you and Scout talked colored folks talk at home. It'd be out of place, wouldn't it? Now, what if I talked white folks talk at church and with my neighbors? They'd think I was putting on airs to beat Moses. But Cal, you know better, I said. It's not necessary to tell all you know. It's not ladylike. In the second place, folks don't like to have somebody around knowing more than they do. It aggravates them. You're not going to change any of them by talking right. They've got to want to learn themselves. And when they don't want to learn, there's nothing you can do but keep your mouth shut or talk their language. So again, still through that lens of that one is right and one is wrong, but also an eloquent description of code switching and what it looked like historically, through the historic lens of the late 1930s in the Deep South. So it's a tricky one to talk about from our 2020 perspective, and I wish we could have a conversation about it rather than me just pointing it out to you. But the fact that Calpurnia does code switch and has that as part of her experience makes her one of the most interesting characters in the book. So Aunt Alexandra shows up at the end of chapter 12, and she does not like the way Atticus is raising Scout and Jem. She thinks that he is doing it all wrong, and she wants to fix them. We learn a lot about the Finch family and Aunt Alexandra's perception of the Finch family, but also that idea of last names dictating who somebody is and what they're all about. Aunt Alexandra is all over that, and we don't see it as firsthand until she shows up, because Atticus has grown away from that. Atticus believes something a little bit bigger. And then I love this. I never understood her preoccupation. That's Aunt Alexandra. Her preoccupation with heredity. Somewhere I had received the impression that fine folks were people who did the best they could with the sense they had. But Aunt Alexandra was of the opinion, obliquely expressed, that the longer a family had been squatting on one patch of land, the finer it was. And she's like, I got this idea somewhere from Atticus, Atticus gave her that idea. And then that makes the Yules fine folks then, by that logic, said Jem. The tribe of which Burris Yule and his brethren consisted had lived on the same plot of earth behind the Macomb dump and had thrived on county welfare money for 3 generations. It's not a mistake that Harper Lee weaves these comments about the Yules back into the story to remind us of who they are, how they live, because we need to have that in the forefront of our mind when we see that they are the white people who are accusing Tom Robinson. So that's author's craft right there. That's definitely on purpose. The caste system, there's that list again, just that reminder that different last names dictate how a person behaves is just because this chapter has a lot of history to it and how Macomb was founded and how it was kind of protected. And so that even in a world where segregation does exist historically, even at Macomb, it's almost like it's in its own bubble of not changing, which makes Atticus even more of an anomaly in regard to the way that he thinks. And Atticus is feeling the pressure from Aunt Alexandra and feels like he has to at least try to make an effort to talk to his kids in a way that represents the family. But he just can't do it. Like he tries, but then he gets mad at himself and it comes out sideways. And it's one of the rare times that we see Atticus less than this ideal human who does the right thing all the time. We're all human, we're all fallible. And this is one of those times. He gets aggravated and he yells and he tries so hard to fix it after the fact by coming in and being silly, but he just he doesn't quite know how to do it. It's a beautiful moment. So Aunt Alexandra wants Calpurnia to leave. She thinks that after she finds out that they were at her church, the kids were at her church, Aunt Alexandra wants Calpurnia gone. Atticus absolutely puts his foot down and says, no way. She's like a mother figure, not going anywhere. But the reality is Aunt Alexandra is frustrated with the fact that Scout doesn't act like a lady. And then this right here is just another moment of Jem growing older. He tries to put his foot down and tell Scout that, it's because you're not grown that you don't understand what's going on. Everybody's worried about the Tom Robinson case and you don't really notice that. And then they have this big fist fight. Atticus tells Scout, just leave it at this. You mind Jem whenever he can make you. Fair enough. There's so much I want to talk about, but we have so many chapters to go through. This is when Dill shows up, right? So apparently he has run away and he's hiding under Scout's bed. And what's significant about this particular moment is, again, Jem breaking the remaining code of their childhood. So instead of keeping Dill a secret and keeping him hidden, he does the responsible thing and he goes and tells Atticus that Dill is here. And why Dill ran away is significant because Harper Lee manages to weave in a reminder about Boo Radley in the part of the book where Boo Radley definitely disappears. He disappears from the forefront of our story. He's so prevalent in part 1 and he kind of goes to the back of our mind in part 2. But she keeps him alive through Dill and through other snippets. And this paragraph right here, Dill is explaining why he ran away. He thinks that they get along a lot better without him. They buy him things and then tell him to go play with them, to leave him alone. And he just feels lonely and isolated and he feels unwanted. And that's really why he runs away. He just feels like he's not a part of. And then right here, why do you reckon Boo Radley's never run off? Dill sighed a long sigh and turned away from me. Maybe he doesn't have anywhere to run off to. But Dill does. Dill ran off to the Finches. In chapter 15, a group of men show up at Atticus's house, and Jem is a little confused even as to why they're there. He thinks they're there because they're angry at Atticus, but actually they're there to give him a heads up and to help him. You have to really read between the lines, and it's almost beneficial to later go back and read some of these passages. But at the end of the day, the trial is about to begin, and Tom Robinson has been moved from a jail outside of Macomb County, and he's been moved to the jail in Macomb County. And the sheriff and Link Dees, who Tom Robinson worked for, and some other men are worried that people are going to take the law into their own hands and to do something bad. So they're worried that something like that might happen, and that's why they're here. And that's what all this conversation is going on around it. They're just worried that something bad might happen. This is a quote that I would come back and look at again later, just in regard to what Aunt Alexandra thinks about the case. Scout doesn't really know what that quote means. Just in regard to, I am in favor of Southern womanhood as much as anybody, but not for preserving polite fiction at the expense of human life. So polite fiction at the expense of human life is something we'll circle back to a little bit later. But in general, people are scared. Jem is scared. Aunt Alexandra is scared. Scout doesn't really understand why people are scared. So this is another moment where we're having to infer and read between the lines, but scared about Atticus. Somebody might hurt him. They're afraid that because he's taking on this trial that somebody is, and they don't think he should be, that they're going to hurt him in some way. So anyway, Tom Robinson has been moved to the Macomb County Jail. And that is the main cause of concern. And what happens is Atticus puts himself in front of the jail the night before the trial, just in case. And exactly what they were worried about would happen happens. A group of men made up primarily of Cunninghams from Old Sarum who have been drinking, they drive up, and what they want is Tom Robinson. They want to lynch him. They want to pull him out of that jail cell and take matters into their own hands. But Atticus is there. And so this conversation, there's so much to talk about. But again, I'm just going to focus primarily on the fact that when Scout runs into the circle of people, and she thinks it's the people that are Atticus's friends from the night before. So she's so embarrassed when she realizes it's a bunch of people she doesn't know. And she just starts talking to them. And sometimes it's really hard to understand why it is that after this conversation, hey, Mr. Cunningham, how's your entailment getting along? Don't you remember me, Mr. Cunningham? I'm Jean Louise Finch. You brought us some hickory nuts one time, remember? He doesn't say anything. He just stands there, and so she just keeps talking. I go to school with Walter, I began again. He's your boy, ain't he? Ain't he, sir? Mr. Cunningham was moved to a faint nod. He did know me, after all. He's in my grade, I said, and he does write well. He's a good boy, I added. A real nice boy. We brought him home for dinner one time. Maybe he told you about me. I beat him up one time, but he was real nice about it. Tell him hey for me, won't you? So she keeps trying to talk, and finally, he squats down, takes Scout by both shoulders, and says, I'll tell him you said, hey, little lady. Then he straightened up and waved a big paw. Let's clear out, he called. Let's get going, boys. And they're gone. And through Scout's lens, it's just kind of like, all right, I don't know what happened, but I was trying to talk to him, and I just kept doing what Atticus told me I should do, and this is super awkward, but just kept talking to him, and then they leave. And it's not until the next morning when Atticus has a conversation with Jem and Scout. Jem is like, this isn't a blind spot. He said that, when people get together in sort of a mob mentality, peer pressure takes over. They have blind spots, and they don't realize that what they're doing is wrong. Jem spoke, don't call that a blind spot. He'd have killed you last night when he first went there. He might have hurt me a little, Atticus conceded. But son, you'll understand folks a little better when you're older. A mob's always made up of people, no matter what. Mr. Cunningham was part of a mob last night, but he was still a man. Every mob in every little southern town is always made up of people you know. Doesn't say much for them, does it? I'll say not, said Jem. So it took an 8-year-old child to bring them to their senses, didn't it? Said Atticus. That proves something, that a gang of wild animals can be stopped simply because they're still human. Maybe we need a police force of children. You children last night made Walter Cunningham stand in my shoes for a minute. That was enough. So now we've circled back to the empathy quote. If you just stand in somebody's shoes for a moment, you can see things from their perspective, and then you're much more likely to get along with them. But Scout talking to Walter Cunningham, Mr. Cunningham, and saying, hey, I go to school with your son. Hey, all of a sudden, Walter Cunningham was able to put himself in Atticus's shoes and say, would I want my son to see me drag a man out of a jail cell and kill him? Because that's what they were saying. They were like, Atticus, get these kids out of here. Get these kids out of here right now, because they were do or die in that mob mentality. They were ready to go in and drag Tom Robinson out. But it wasn't until Walter Cunningham noticed and said, wow, I don't want to be in anybody else's, I wouldn't want to be in that situation, that he was able to take a step back and see what he was really creating. So Scout's innocence made that mob dissemble. So the trial is underway. Everybody is showing up to see this trial. Mr. Dolphus Raymond is significant because he's going to show up again in a later chapter. But everybody sees him drinking out of this paper bag. He's drinking whiskey and Coca-Cola out of a paper bag because he's married. He's a white man married to a black woman, has mixed children. This idea of how mixed children don't have a place because in a segregated deep South Alabama town, you have the black community, you have the white community, and these mixed children don't have a place to exist, is something that is going to come back up in a later chapter. That's another one I wish we could sit down in a classroom and talk about in a little more detail. And we will talk about it more when we see it later. This right here is interesting just because Scout realizes that Atticus was appointed to defend Tom Robinson. And so she doesn't understand, well, if he was made to do this, why isn't he going around saying, oh, I know, it's a crazy trial, but I have to, like, it's my job. They appointed me. I had no choice. He doesn't do that. So Scout's like, that's kind of confusing. The court appointed Atticus to defend him. Atticus aimed to defend him. And that's what they didn't like about it. That's confusing to Scout. The fact that he aims to do it and do it well is the part. She doesn't quite have all the pieces of the puzzle that we do. And then lastly, as the trial starts, there's nowhere for the kids to sit. Reverend Sykes is on his way up to the colored balcony, and he asks Jem, Scout, and Dill if they want to sit with him. And people get up so that they can sit in the front, which they didn't have to do, but they did. And so now they have a front row seat to the trial. And as this trial begins, Heck Tate, the sheriff, is on the stand. When we pick back up, we're going to be doing a deep dive into the trial. So please make sure that you have read through chapters 12 through 16 and you're ready to participate in that with us. So that was a skim. There is so much more to talk about in these chapters. I can even already in the back of my mind think about a bunch of stuff that we didn't talk about, but this is a good start and it gets us in a good place to be ready for the trial.